The museum began as a teaching collection of Dr. Thomas Dent Mutter. He was professor of surgery at Jefferson Medical College from 1841 to 1856. And so it started as his accumulation of material to teach his course in pathological anatomy. The purpose of a medical museum is to train physicians to be able to take better care of the living. And in order to do that, they have to study the bodies of the dead. This stuff was not intended for the general public. It was always kept behind doors for the profession only. This stuff is verboten, it's taboo. It is a fine thing if you can be as useful or more useful after death than you were before. People should be proud of the fact that their bodies can continue to serve humanity. People say, shouldn't she be buried? Is this respectful to have this body on display? Absolutely. What is so respectful about sticking a body under the earth? The case of Robert Wadlow, who's the tallest man who ever lived, 8'11.1. He was very careful that his skeleton would never end up in a medical museum. And so he was buried in Alton, Illinois, under a truckload of cement. Which is a pity. All that information is lost. It's an enormous gift that they give by allowing their bodies to be studied for the benefit of the living. I grew up outside of Philadelphia, and there were always rumors about a medical museum where you could see babies in bottles. And the funny thing is that I went to church next door to this building since I was 8 years old. Destiny. The one question I'm asked more than anything else in the museum is it real? Just because something is in a jar doesn't mean it's real. If it's in a jar in fluid, it's real. Back when it was more difficult to preserve wet tissue, oftentimes it was represented in wax, because that was very durable. And wax is perfectly adapted to preserving all sorts of dermatological conditions. A lot of these moulageurs, the wax modelers, started out making wax fruit. Artistically, they're obviously creations of a high level of skill. And it's kind of neat. This is the series of sliced heads. People just seem fascinated by the fact that you can take a face and a head and just slice it up like that and display portions. See, it's in fluid, so you know it's real. People talk about being grossed out, appalled, revulsed by what they see. Whatever emotional reaction you have, that's good. If you come in and you're totally clinical about everything you see, you're not getting the full impact of the Mutter Museum. It's humans looking at humans. You see people with these horrible lesions on their faces, and you start thinking about the fact that they had to wake up every morning for years with a face that they knew was repellent to other people. You know, you wake up and you've got a pimple, and you feel awful, you feel very self-conscious. Well, imagine when you have this huge, fungating lesion on your nose, and no doctor can make it go away. It's a guy that died in 1973. His name is Harry Eastlack. He had fibrodysplasia ossificans progressiva, skeletal bone growing outside the normal skeleton. By the time he died, he could only move his fingers and toes.
So you become just one gigantic bone?
Yes. Yeah.
How did he arrive?
In a large wooden crate full of packing peanuts. A lot of peanuts. His sister, she used to come after his skeleton came into the museum in the 1980s. She said it bothered her less to see Harry as a skeleton than when he was alive and suffering.
How many specimens are you on a first-name basis with?
Not very many. Well, of course, we have the Hurdle Skull Collection, where we have 139 skulls, and for the most part we know the names and ages and cause of death and birthplace for all of those individuals. We have John Wilkes Booth, we have Chief Justice Marshall's bladder stones, Grover Cleveland's jaw tumor, the skull of Ellen Jones, famous murder victim, of course Mary Ashbury, the dwarf, but I don't usually call her Mary, I usually refer to her as the achondroplastic dwarf.
Tell me about her.
She's 3 foot 6 inches tall. She's displayed in a case with our 7 foot 6 inch giant. She's actually a rather sad obstetrical case. Doctors were called in to this brothel where this white dwarf, Mary Ashbury, had found refuge. And I think the phrase was, "There all her misfortunes fell upon her, and she became pregnant." So when they found her, she was in labor. The baby's head was normal, and her pelvis wasn't, so it became stuck. The doctors did what was called for at that time. They tried to break up the baby's head, puncture it so that it could be compressed and actually removed vaginally. They were not successful in completely collapsing the head, and they had to go to cesarean section belatedly. Not surprisingly, the mother died of peritonitis 3 days later. It was a very typical but a very sad story. They prepared her so that her hand was holding the baby's head with, of course, the sensibilities of the late 19th century. Not a problem. Nowadays, I thought that was a little over the top, so we have her displayed with the head on the floor. The museum is full of stories of people. Some of the names I know, some I don't, but they're all human beings, or parts thereof.
Isn't there something about being surrounded by the record of incredible suffering?
Well, if I were a more sensitive person, perhaps. But the fact is, I don't see that.
You're linked with the sideshow, with the circus exhibit.
The fact is, we're dealing with the same people. The conjoined twins, the microcephalics, the giants, the dwarves. A freak show can be explained within the realm of medicine, pathological anatomy. We can medicalize it. We demythologize it. In the freak show, you make up stories. Take a microcephalic, you make him into a pinhead. The leopard people, vitiligo, and partial albinism, it's the same people. The sideshow used the medical profession to legitimize itself. They gain greater status and credibility. If doctors are interested, certainly it's okay for you to be.
It's amazing.
We are not there to fool people. We're not there to deceive people. We are simply there to show people what is. There she is, Madame Dimanche. She was a widow in Paris around the turn of the 19th century who had this horn, cornucutaneum, an overgrowth of the horny layer of the skin. This is probably the most spectacular horn ever grown by a human, I think.
The most spectacular horn ever?
Well, okay, perhaps I exaggerate, but you show me a better horn.
I look at a horn, there's something deeply mysterious about it.
It's mysterious if you don't know the mechanism by which that horn came to be.
How come you don't have a horn?
How do you know I don't? Oh, the rats. 3 Worcester rats. The Worcester rats were the first pure strain of lab rat. In this photograph, they just look beautiful. I mean, you see the delicate paws. They just look as if they're dancing. And for some reason, I just love this photograph. I'm looking at the specimens with somebody else's eyes. All of a sudden, something that I'd been ignoring becomes beautiful because somebody thought it was beautiful enough to shoot.
Is there a specimen that is your favorite?
It would be Chang'an, the plaster cast, the original Siamese twins, born in Bangkok in 1811. It's the same year that Dr. Mutter was born, so it almost seems fate that their destinies should become intertwined. The most remarkable thing isn't this superficial connecting band of skin and cartilage. It's the fact that they were able to live as normal, well, relatively normal farmers. They went through the Civil War, they owned slaves, they married sisters, and eventually raised 21 children. This is the only plaster cast of these individuals in the entire world. We had it made after we did their autopsy in 1874. In a basin below the cast is their actual conjoined livers, the only organ that they shared through this simple band that connected them at the breastbone. Surgically, we can do far more daring separations. There's a cost. Oftentimes, one of the twins will die or be mutilated. Is it really so bad for people to go through life joined together? The answer, I think, is no. It's not so bad. Besides, you always have someone to talk to.
Is that a good thing?
For some people. They finally died at the age of 63, and their bodies were brought up to Philadelphia for an autopsy. When Chang's heart stopped, Aang gradually pumped his blood into his brother's body, and it didn't come back. And so he lapsed into a coma and then died. This is another one of my favorites, the collection of placentas.
And how are these preserved?
Just dried, with the vessels injected with wax. They're beautiful. Well, perhaps not everyone would think so, but I like them.
Just the sheer beauty of them?
Yeah, and because they tell interesting stories. Twins. One twin died in utero, the skeleton preserved on the surface of its placenta. All the blood vessels have dried up. Sort of a little shadow of what might have been. I love this little girl. She has this wonderful, straightforward, unaffected look at the camera. She's totally unself-conscious, and yet she has this extraordinary body with the, this deficiency of the lower limbs. You don't get the sense of any deformity, or certainly not disability. She's perfectly able. The third picture in this series we didn't use. It shows her in a steel and leather prosthesis. It's sort of a bucket that goes around her hips, and then she has steel legs with little shoes on them. All of a sudden, she looks like a cripple. Two specimens, one placed in front of the other. A fetus and a jaw prepared by the Spalteholz method by Oscar Batson. He was so proud of this that he actually signed the jar.
This is the very first time that you allowed an embryo to be photographed?
Yes, a wet specimen of a fetus. That and another shot of triplets, which spontaneously aborted. And it is so absolutely beautiful. One is facing, the other two are turned away, communing with themselves. They're sort of in a dreamlike state.
Where does medical illustration or anatomical specimen end and art object begin?
I'm not entirely comfortable with that. Particularly when you're talking about human material. I'm the caretaker of these specimens. I've been the one responsible for seeing that they're treated with respect.
Fetuses in particular? Why?
Fluid-preserved fetuses. They're very real, and it's just I don't know, it's a little too close. I don't know.
Have you had your own run-ins with disease?
Yeah. Well, I had Hodgkin's disease in '72. The only knowledge I had of Hodgkin's was a friend of mine who had died. He died. He had it and he died. So everyone thought it was going to be a death sentence for me too, including me. I was successfully treated. Medicine had saved my life, therefore, it was appropriate to give my life to medicine. I was saved for this purpose. I am very tempted often on the street to hand out my card and say, we can take care of your funeral arrangements if you'll give us your body, but I have successfully resisted that temptation.
You've never gone up to anybody?
No. Well, there was one guy who had a very interestingly shaped head. He did begin the conversation saying, you probably would like my head, wouldn't you? And so we got to the point of discussing the fact that arrangements could be made after his death where we could indeed obtain his head. I haven't heard from him lately.
How is the oddly shaped head shaped?
Sort of a tower skull, elongated, in an upward fashion, yeah, sort of taller.
So maybe it's only the privileged few among us that get to become specimens in the Mutter Museum.
I like to think that, yes. I promote that idea.
Do you want to go to the museum after you die?
Absolutely. I'm debating now whether I'm going to be freeze-dried or plastinated.
Plastination, please tell me more.
Plastination is the technique invented by Gunther von Hagens. You replace the fluid in the body with plastic so that you retain a certain suppleness, but the tissues are perfectly preserved without anything like alcohol or formaldehyde. They are perfectly fixed. Now, with freeze drying, it'd be a lot lighter and easier to move around.
Plastinated, on the other hand?
I don't know. It's, it leaves a little bit of flexibility.
So it's not just a search for immortality, it's a search for immortality and flexibility.
Yes. Yeah.
So it must be some joy of just being able to look at a person and thinking, now, that person someday is going to look really great on a shelf.
Oh, you'd look lovely. Yes, you would. Matter of fact, I can sort of see you with an Antonia Scarpa type of presentation. Antonia Scarpa was an anatomist in the University of Pavia in Italy. There is a little cabinet over the door, and if you open it up, you will see the head of Antonia Scarpa with his eyes kind of half open, this flaming red hair, and he looks wonderful. And for a while after I saw that, I thought, that's how I want to end up. Just take my head and put it in a little cabinet.
So you kind of see me in a jar.
Well, that's all I've been seeing, so I'm sort of in a kind of square frame. It's not a really big stretch. It's not a leap to see you smiling in a jar.
What is at the heart of this? This is the only job you've ever had.
Yes.
Correct?
Yes. I'm learning about things I am really fascinated about. For whatever reason, why does anybody become anything? I am fascinated by anatomy and pathology. When you see a really great case of, eburnation of the joint in arthritis, a textbook version right there in front of your eyes, you just, get shivers.